Thank you so much for joining the panel. I want to start by thanking the Chelsea, Professor, and Kathy for all you have done to the conceptualization and also preparation of the symposium. And Greg and Carol, you guys have done a great job. Thank you. And also Zhiyan and Zhangxi for your help. So, and then the title is called Digitalizing Chinese art exhibition. That doesn't mean that I have a exhibition plan in mind already, but whether through this project I want to propose ways in which we'll be able to justify the ways that we use technology in museum setting. Also, kind of try to intellectualize the how and why we do this in this way rather than some other ways. Okay, let me start. Okay, hold on. This undated photo on the screen, likely from the 1950s, shows the Chinese gallery of the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, then called William Rockwell Nelson Gallery of Art, in its entirety. At the rear of which is the Chinese temple, like you have seen already in Lin En's talk, as how it was called, and it was called Chinese temple then. This gallery space has not changed much since it was opened to the public in 1933. It has been the place of contemplation for many, not only on the fantastic examples of Chinese Buddhist art, but also the ambience of the Far Eastern religion revealed by them. I still remember long ago, in one morning, when I was at a gallery, I saw an Asian woman kneeling in front of the well-known Guan Yin statue, reciting the Heart Sutra and praying for a long while, a scene that reminds me of many Buddhists back in China similarly making prayers devoutly to sculptural icons at Buddhist caves. Not the same kind of space, yet to many Kansas Cityans, the gallery at the Nelson is the Chinese temple. Each of the pieces in the temple has a unique history and artistic value, and each has been studied by scholars such as Lin En and many others over the decades since its inception. But what exactly is this space or place? Inside a Western museum, it is not really a Chinese temple. But then what is it? Such a question has guided the digital project that I will introduce in this presentation. With so many different digital gadgets at our disposal in today's art exhibition, I think this is still a critical question to ask. What is the space, digitally generated or not, that we create in a museum for exhibiting East Asian art outside its place of origin? For this presentation, I will use the Nelson's Chinese temple as a primary example of discussion, focusing specifically on the coffer sitting or Zaojing originated from the Beijing Zhihua temple. All right, object story one. Dr. Lin En Lu, in her talk, has analyzed how the idea of Chinese temple came about and recounted its early history, so I won't repeat them here. It suffices to say that the making of the Chinese temple was a result of at least the three experts' efforts, providing American in the Midwestern city a rare glimpse into the art and beauty of a Chinese Buddhist temple. Describing the impression of the view into the serenity of the temple, the local newspaper, KC Star, reported in the second day after the opening, I quote, "The deep silence of China was in the temple yesterday. Among masterpieces of 3,000 years, the glory and beauty of a deathless people seemed nearer than Rocky Road outside." More than a curatorial strategy, the report asserts the ensemble of artifacts arranged in the Chinese temple is elegant, innovative, and stunning. In 1933, although unprecedented for showcasing Chinese art, the idea of assembling a group of objects related by style, date, region, or context was not new. As Dr. Lin En has suggested, the Nelson's Chinese temple, to a great extent, close to the Fed in the museum world than for building period rooms. The trend was already seen in the 1970s, flourished during the 1910s and 1920s in the US, as illustrated in examples of the screens from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And here may also touch on this briefly in her talk. Signaling a different idea of art installation and seeing and experiencing art in a museum by providing a culturally and contextually cohesive setting. Advocates argue that in comparison with more traditional gallery space, the Pier Room could lead visitors to believe some kind of time machine had transported them back in time when entering the room and encountering the artworks of the past. Fitz Kimball, the director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, then argued that in a Pier Room, I quote again, the whole pageant of the history of civilization and of art is spread before the visitor, who may travel at ease as with a magic carpet through space and through time, end quote. I love the magic carpet part. As such, the museum became a theater of historical preservation in the profession's enthusiasm in the so-called authentic installation that underlines the philosophy of Pier Rooms. In American museums where Chinese art was collected and exhibited during the first decades of the 20th century, their display still reminds us of curial cabinets. And then here I really have learned a lot about the history in the past 2 days. And so I won't really dwell on this issue. While others appropriated the artifacts against the white stucco of the Western galleries. The Nelson Gallery's Chinese temple was therefore one of the first museum installations, if not the earliest one, in the US that utilized the authentic pieces to construct a period setting in which artifacts could be more culturally associated with each other, giving rise to a Buddhist aura to experience the art of the religion located on the other side of the world. The making of the Pier Room was, however, not without criticism. Many critics and scholars were suspicious of the nature of the Pier Room. Is it a fantasy, they asked, or a fairly accurate approximation of the past? In the case of the Chinese temple, as we have learned from Dr. Lin and Lu's paper, all the components have different places of origin and from different periods. When Bodhisattva Guanyin was installed in the Chinese temple in 1934, a report from the American magazine of art reads, and I quote, "The Chinese goddess," says a statement from the Nelson Gallery, "seated in a characteristic position of royal ease, conforms perfectly with its surroundings in the Ming Temple built in 1444, corresponding as it does rather closely with the wall painting of the 14th, 15th centuries, which adorns one complete wall." So yes, the Chinese temple is made of authentic objects from China. However, in reality, such a temple space never exists in China. In other words, the assembly of these artifacts of different origins in time and space at best fabricates an illusion of a Chinese temple, Buddhist temple. So the criticism, I think, is well taken. However, regardless of its nature or whether it is a fantasy or not, the Chinese temple has and continues to mesmerize its visitors. With Buddhist image on the mural, elegant statue of the Guanyin and coffer sittings, craftsmanship and powerful presentation of the majestic dragon that anchors the gallery space. In the case of the last artifact, namely the coffer sitting from the Zhihua temple, though viewers might not immediately understand the complicated iconography carved into the elaborate structure, it has become an integrated part of the Chinese temple since its making during the 1930s. The coffer ceiling, in other words, has had a history in that very space. Object story 2. So located to the east of the Forbidden City in Beijing, the Zhihua temple, earlier we saw the map, the human showed us. So I don't have the map right here, but it's to the east of Forbidden City. The Zhihua temple, literally temple of the transformative wisdom is still standing. Though having had several major renovations over the past decades, the 15th century Sino-Tibetan Buddhist temple remains largely intact, except for the two cover ceilings. The temple precinct is a narrow rectangle featuring two Buddha halls along the central axis. The Zhihua Hall, from which the cover ceiling now at the Philadelphia Museum of Art came, and we just learned about that from Hiromi's paper, and a two-story structure behind it, the most prominent building of the entire temple, of which the lower level is the Rulai Hall, or Hall of Shakyamuni, and the upper, the one for pavilion, or 10,000 Buddha pavilion. So here is the image of the Rulai Hall during the day, because it's really big and there's two big trees over there. It's really hard to take a picture. And this is the picture I took. The temple director gave to me a couple of years ago. All right, so, and inside the Rulai Hall, the central statue of Shakyamuni is flanked by two heavenly kings, Indra, Di Sutian to his right, and Brahma, Da Fan Tian to his left, all sculpted when the temple was built in 1444. Two sutra cabinets is right here in the back, as you can see right here. Two sutra cabinets were added when temple received a complete set of Yongde Tripitaka in 1462. The entire space was surrounded by 10,000 small Buddha niches on its left, right, and back walls. So here, and then back, and also on the other side, and continuing onto the upper level. So you see that there's a wall on the first floor and continue onto the second floor. It's all full of the 10,000 Buddha, the small niches, in the small niches. So that's the reason why the second floor is called one for pavilion, the 10,000 Buddha pavilion. Surrounded by the seemingly countless Buddhas in the small niches, the upper level features the three bodies of the Buddha, or Sanshen Four, with Buddha Vairocana at the center, accompanied by Shakyamuni to his left and Vajrayana Buddha, or Rusanafu, to his right. The Vairocana was made along with the construction of the temple, whereas the two flanking Buddhas, as proposed by Catherine Jiang, might have been made at a later date. The ceiling right above the central Vairocana right here, now exposing the roof structure, is where the recessed cover ceiling was originally constructed, as shown in the photo taken before it was removed in 1930 or 1931. Now installed in today's Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. So a couple of years ago, the temple decided to put a ceiling to conceal the opening hall, but then later they took it off already. So, and then this is a picture that I took a couple of years ago. So it is in that location, in this very location, and that for that position that the cover ceiling was made as part of the Buddha's space, and that its history had unfolded in the temple until it was removed and relocated. The cover ceiling can only be in one place. Losing it to the US Museum, the 10,000 Buddha Pavilion appears incomplete, both visually and iconographically. Also, as it was relocated and installed in the museum gallery, the series of small pavilions known as Tiangong Louge, or Heavenly Palace, and towers you can see right here in the old photo, mounted right underneath the cover ceiling's outer frame, was detached and removed. Part of, see that is now so the Nelson in the installation, they took them off. So I consider that as part of its transformation from a Buddhist temple in Beijing to the Temple of Art in the United States. I've argued elsewhere that to fabricate a coherent integrated space of the Chinese temple, the decision was made to alter, modify, or change part of the artifacts so that they could fit physically together as an ensemble in the gallery. Removing the small pavilions was only one of the examples. However, this curatorial decision simultaneously also concealed, if not completely erased, the traces of their individual history prior to being incorporated in the gallery space. This is not a place to elaborate on the historical trajectory of the curatorial practice. It suffices to say that the trend has been turned since the 1960s, if not earlier, to recuperate the history of the artifacts in a pure room by using additional text or other visual aids so that they could be understood contextually. In recent years, digital devices have provided the more engaging and certainly most popular methods to fully address the contextual issues of individual artworks that share the same exhibition space. As demonstrated in Hiromi's presentation, by using AR or augmented reality technology, the device brings the cover seating to the visitors up and close with an abundance of details and information for exploration. In a way, when the visitor is immersed in the artificial reality, the cover seating is detached from the surroundings and thus regains its individual status. Another new technology that has gained more acclaim recently is 3D digital technology. The new technology provides a method to accurately recreate and simulate the reality virtually with all its visual details and physical specificities. Virtual technology can also produce digital models using 3D scanning from real objects with the exact shape, volume, and measurements. In other words, 3D models is a true three-dimensional entity only existing in different form and in the other space. Though not real, 3D models nonetheless provide an alternative yet more flexible, credible, and desirable way of accessing and appreciating our object. On your right is a seated bodhisattva from Tianlongshan Cave, number 17, also in the Nelson's collection. On your left is a 3D model of the sculpture generated from an authentic piece. Using 3D technology, we can now reunite the digital model of the dislocated bodhisattva virtually with its original cave setting. This is a project that the spearheaded by Kathy a few years ago. It's called Tianlongshan Digitalization Project. And here's a website that you can go see more details. But basically, Kathy spent really several years to scan all the sculptures from Tianlongshan outside China. And a few years ago, the center worked with Taiyuan University of Technology to scan the cave itself. In the case of cave 17, so here is the current state of the cave. Now we can literally place the heads and bodies back to the cave. And a couple years ago, 2019, the Tianlongshan Baoguansuo, so the bureau in charge of the cave, put together a digital exhibition. And so they actually made a 3D kind of enterable virtual reality. I can show you right here, but I have a little video clip. They kind of make a little video to advertise it. So Greg, if you can help me play the video, that'd be great. Okay, so sorry for the audio. It's really loud. I know about that. So I should have warned you about that. So in any case, so as real and fanciful as a three-dimensionally reconstruct cave is, the virtual space that could be toured inside is fictive. Like I said, this video actually shows you how you will see if you put a helmet on. So the virtual space is effective, never existing in reality, not now nor in the past. However, what we learn from our digital reconstruction of the cave space is that we seem able to reverse the sculpture's fragmentation and separation with the cave, and thus retrieve their context and history. So this destruction of the cave, a lot of scholars in China describe this process as 不可逆转. So literally, it's kind of irreversible. So it has been done already. But the digital project we start with the fragments and slowly work it back. Seems like we'll be able to reverse the process digitally and then learn about and retrieve their context and history. Starting in 2018, the Beijing Zhihua Temple digitalization project was conceived with a similar intention. A digital reconstruction of the temple interior with a cover sitting now in a museum collection. Yet from the outset, we approached it slightly differently, with a particular goal of retrieving the original context and history of the cover sitting. So my part is only, I try to kind of put the technology in perspective. And later, the Professor Chen after me will spend more time and then talk about the technical part more in detail. So with this the goal in mind, accordingly, while a detailed high definition scan was performed on the cover sitting to capture as many details and as much accurate information as possible, we also digitally documented the entire Chinese temple to record how it is installed and its association with other artifacts inside the gallery space. So what you're seeing right here is what we call the cloud points. That's where the scan actually done. This is not a model. So you can see we even scan the top part. So we climb up to the roof to see the backside. Or rooftop, or how do you say that? So that part that is hidden by the ceiling to scan that. So this is not a model, and this is the model after the cloud points, and then we put together as a model. And also, instead of scanning the cover sitting as one big object, our team actually scanned and produced its timber structural components separately, such that they could be disassembled and reassembled piece by piece, including the miniature pavilions. So you cannot actually disassemble the cover sitting in a gallery anymore, but digitally you can actually do it with the method of our scanning. Similarly, at the Zhihua Temple, the scan was done to capture both the exterior and interior of the two-story structure, Wulai Hall and the one for pavilion. So this again is a cloud points, and if I cut further into it, you can see how the sculpture related to each other. Indeed, these two statues, they can line up with each other, and you can also see how all the different iconographical program in relationship. So inside the one for pavilion on the second level, the immediate setting of the cover sitting was carefully documented, and including the three wooden statues that represent the three bodies of the Buddha. I'm showing one of the models that was made already by the scanning. And collaborating with the Department of Architecture at the Tsinghua University, we did a thorough investigation of the timber frame structure to determine how the missing cover sitting should be reconstructed in place accurately. So this is a cross section. So, and then we have done all the other measurements and then discern the parts and then cut further into it. So you can see how, the relationship in the sculptures, also the spatial relationship. So from first floor, second floor, and indeed, here is a cover scene at the apex of the entire building. So the result of the studies then became the basis on which the 3D model was generated, alongside the historical photos used as important references. So because the building has the Zhaojing was removed 90 years ago, and the building will change over time. So we have to go back to the historical photos to make sure that everything is correct. And here, this is our final result. I just got this photo. It's actually a screenshot about a week ago. So think about this photo was published by the 中国营造学社, but when Liang Shichen and Liu Dunzhen, when they got to the temple, the ceiling was gone already, was being removed. So they didn't actually see the Zhaojing in place. And finally, we'll be able to put it back in space. So I hope by now it is clear that there is one coffer sitting in our discussion that, as its life story unfolds, engages two different times and spaces. One loaded with symbolic meanings, of which the coffer sitting is a part in a religious context on your right, while the other on your left, a modern Western museum in which the coffer sitting is a physical artifact of outstanding craftsmanship and representative of Buddhist art from one of the most prestigious Buddhist temples in 15th century Beijing. In documenting the coffer sitting inside the Chinese temple, we articulate its correlation with other artifacts that together form the gallery space and its role in making that space. But we also undo its installation by taking it apart piece by piece to learn about its structure and the state of its current preservation. In the process of retrieving the early history of the coffer sitting, our digital project is meant to reconstruct and relearn its specific spatial and symbolic functionality and ontology. As can be seen in this image on the screen, not just a decorative component in the timber frame structure. The coffer sitting is located at the apex of the elevation, rising from the Shakyamuni on the lower level to the Vairocana on the upper. It is also a point where the 10,000 Buddhas converge from below in both east and west sides under the curving ceiling. So I can't show very well, but here's actually a curved ceiling right here. And then so so it becomes a canopy, kind of converge all the space, the structure at that point. And set off by a series of small pavilions that represent heavenly palaces and towers. The coffer sitting simulates the heavenly Rome dominated by the majestic dragon, corresponding to the Vairocana Buddha as the center of the Buddhist universe, therefore turning the entire Buddha hall into a Buddhist virtual world. So the term virtual, derived from Latin virtus, means potential as versus the actual. Virtuality exists in the matrices of multiple times and spaces, providing both actual and potential dimensions of reality. To a great extent, the Chinese temple, consisting of artifacts from different times and places, was a virtual space, a world of Buddhist art in which one could enter and tour at ease. But the fabricated space also betrays how Chinese art was conceptualized in the West during the 1930s. The digitally reconstructed wonderful pavilion on your left is not real, but it allows us to recuperate part of the coffer sitting's history and significance in the evocation of a Buddhist virtuality that has been lost since the coffer sitting was removed. Most significantly, the digital technology that turns the Buddha Hall in Beijing into a 3D model, also like a magic carpet of our time, makes the unmovable building structure movable, thus capable of traversing time and space. Through digital technology, the multiple times and spaces that have become part of the coffer sitting's definition and identity now could be seen virtually in juxtaposition. In conclusion, it is through digital technology that we can begin to speak about and unveil different realities of our work in a much more perceivable and palpable sense. The goal of the Beijing Zhihua Temple digitalization project is more than simply creating a virtual space where the coffer sitting is reunited with the original Buddha Hall. Instead, it is conceived to put the artifact, namely the coffer sitting, in a sharper focus such that we are able to see how it engages the spaces it is located and people it interacts with throughout its history to get a better understanding of its life story and significance thus created. Many of my colleagues have warned that by using digital technology in our exhibitions, we surrender to the trend of dematerializing art in the museum. In this presentation, I hope I've convinced them that that is not the case. If we use it as a means to our end rather than the end itself. Thank you. So finally, I want to thank all the institutions who have helped out the project. Thank you.